Get lost. You screw up.
Finally, that parasite is gone.
My husband, Kyle, and my father-in-law, Greg, looked at me with disdain. The way they twisted their mouths into a smirk was eerily identical, a true father-son resemblance. Next to them, my mother-in-law, Helen, and my sister-in-law, Nina, were struggling to hold back their laughter. Their sneers were just as unpleasant, making me want to avert my eyes. For the past 2 years, I had endured constant bullying from these people. They took advantage of my timid nature, using me as their punching bag. But I had reached my limit. I quietly listened to their insults, saying nothing. Seeing my reaction, they only got bolder, hurling more insults at me. What they don't know is that they're about to face a hell they never imagined. My name is Melissa Hart, and I turned 30 this spring. After graduating from college, I started working as a regular office worker at a company in the city. I spent every day commuting between home and work, worrying that I might end up single and alone without ever meeting anyone. But then, one day, something happened. During a trip with my friends, I had a fateful encounter.
It's so rare and surprising to have young people like you staying here in such a rural area.
The person who greeted us at the countryside inn where we stayed was Kyle, who was single at the time. Kyle's family ran the inn, and he was training to take over as the second-generation owner. He wasn't exactly a handsome guy, but his gentle smile made me fall in love with him at first sight. After that, I gathered the courage to ask for Kyle's contact information, and we gradually grew closer.
To be honest, I've liked you since the first time I saw you, Melissa.
After a few meals together, Kyle confessed to me, his face bright red. I was so happy that we had both fallen in love at first sight that I almost jumped for joy. But I managed to hold back and immediately nodded in response to his confession. After 3 years of dating, Kyle and I got married. Since Kyle's home was quite far from mine, my family was worried. Don't worry, Kyle's parents and his sister, Nina, who lives with them, are all kind people. There's nothing to be concerned about. It was a bit sad to quit the company I had worked at since graduating from college, but after marrying Kyle, I immediately moved and started working at the inn. The inn was on the same property as his family's house, so I thought it was nice that my commute had become easier compared to when I worked in the city. However, my carefree thoughts quickly disappeared.
Melissa, your laundry is wrinkled, you know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Honestly, have you never done laundry properly before?
It was my mother-in-law, Helen, who was grumbling. At first, Helen seemed like a kind innkeeper, but after I got married, her nagging gradually increased.
Melissa, can you take care of this work for me? I need to pick up my kid.
Yes, I understand. My sister-in-law, Nina, who I initially thought was a kind person, started treating me like a convenient servant. Nina had returned to live with the family after her divorce a few years ago, and her child, who took after her, was quite spoiled.
Honestly, both Helen and Nina are making Melissa work too hard. If you have any trouble, Melissa, rely on me.
My father-in-law, Greg, seemed kind on the surface, but there was an obvious leer in his eyes when he looked at me. Once, when I was taking a shower, Greg came in, claiming it was an accident, but he couldn't hide his obvious delight. Is this life going to continue like this? By the time 6 months had passed since the wedding, Helen started verbally abusing me, and Nina began stealing my belongings and money. Recently, Greg had become bolder in trying to touch me, and I was reaching my breaking point. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and tearfully confided in Kyle. But
There's no way my family would do something like that.
Kyle didn't listen to me and instead yelled at me, his face red with anger. And after that, even Kyle started treating me poorly.
I wish I had dated you longer. Then I would have realized how useless you are.
By the time a year had passed since our marriage, I had become completely accustomed to hearing such things from Kyle. The harassment from my in-laws had also become a daily occurrence, and I somehow managed to endure it by shutting off my emotions. But one day, something happened.
Melissa, come here.
Where are we going? I asked, but Helen glared at me and spoke.
Where do you think? To the OB/GYN. You still haven't gotten pregnant, so you need to get checked out.
What? I had grown used to remaining expressionless no matter what was done to me, but this was enough to make me gasp in surprise. Helen seemed to enjoy my reaction, and she gave a nasty grin as she grabbed my arm with surprising strength.
Come on, let's go.
Wait, please. Helen was big and strong, so my resistance was completely ineffective. I was forcibly taken to the OB/GYN, where I was thoroughly examined. The result was that I was diagnosed as having a body that would make pregnancy difficult. According to the doctor, this condition wasn't uncommon, and it didn't mean I couldn't get pregnant at all. However, as soon as Helen heard the diagnosis, she said, "I knew it," and started berating me. When we got home, Helen spread the news to Nina and Greg that I couldn't get pregnant. Before I had a chance to correct them and say I was only having difficulty, my in-laws began hurling insults at me.
If I had known we were getting such a useless daughter-in-law, I wouldn't have let Kyle marry you.
That's right. The only reason I defended you was because I thought you'd give birth to the next heir of the inn. But now that you're useless, there's no need to defend you. At least be useful as labor around here.
Or better yet, shouldn't you just get divorced already? We don't need someone incompetent working for us.
The harsh words kept coming, and I couldn't even cry. I just had to take it.
My marriage was a complete failure.
Kyle's words were the most piercing of all. There was no one here to help me. That was the moment I realized it. Even so, I still wanted to have a child with Kyle since we were married. Maybe if I had a child, my in-laws would treat me better. With that small hope in mind, I decided to talk to Kyle one day. Kyle, I need to talk to you.
What is it?
Kyle was sitting in his usual spot in the living room, reading a magazine, and didn't even bother to look at me. Lately, he either ignored me or gave me a blunt response whenever I tried to talk to him. But I didn't let that stop me. I want to try fertility treatment. It might help us have the child everyone wanted. I was about to continue, explaining that, but my words were cut off by Kyle's angry outburst.
What? We don't have money for that.
Before I knew it, Kyle had thrown the magazine he was reading at me. I was so shocked by the suddenness of it all that I just stood there in a daze.
It's your fault for not having a normal body that can get pregnant. If you really want the treatment, pay for it yourself.
But I don't have any money. The truth is, shortly after I married Kyle, Helen took my bank card. She said it was to prevent me from wasting money, but I think she just didn't like the idea of me spending money freely. I never gave her the PIN, so at least she can't use it without my permission. And since I started working at this inn, I've never received a paycheck. Because of this, I don't have any money of my own. Wait, I know. I'm going to start working.
Huh?
Recently, Helen said that finances were tight. If I get a job outside the family business, I can contribute to the household income. Although our inn isn't struggling that much, my in-laws have a habit of spending money recklessly. Because of that, our household finances are always on the edge. I thought this was a great idea. But apparently, it was just another thing to make Kyle angry.
You're known in the community as the wife of this inn. If people see you working outside, they'll think the inn is in trouble. Can't you even realize that much?
But how else can I earn money?
That's none of my business.
With that, Kyle walked away, leaving me standing there, unable to work outside or get fertility treatment. What am I supposed to do? All I was left with was a sense of overwhelming despair. For 2 years after our marriage, I endured constant harassment from my in-laws. Lately, they don't even call me by my name. Instead, they refer to me as useless, incompetent, or you jerk. I'm no longer Kyle's wife. I'm just the servant of his family. At first, I cried every day, but now I don't feel anything anymore. Am I going to spend the rest of my life as a servant to my in-laws? The endless days with no way out are slowly eating away at my soul. Recently, the stress has built up so much that I can hardly sleep. I thought I had stopped feeling anything, but deep down, it seems my heart is silently screaming against this situation. Ugh. Lack of sleep caused me to feel dizzy. That day, as usual, I started cleaning the inn alone early in the morning before anyone else was awake. If I didn't finish by the time my in-laws woke up, they might deny me breakfast. I fought off the dizziness and kept working as best as I could.
What? You're already up.
A voice suddenly spoke from behind, startling me so much I nearly jumped. Oh, good morning, Greg. You're up early.
It's my age. I don't sleep well anymore.
Greg said, letting out a big yawn. I thought to myself that if he was up early, he could help me a little, but I kept that thought to myself and continued working.
You don't look well. Let me take a closer look.
As Greg said this, he started moving closer to me. His eyes were filled with a lewd look, and I finally realized just how dangerous it was to be alone with him. When his hand reached for my waist, I quickly pulled away, my face turning pale. I'm fine. I'll just go clean outside. I hurriedly ran outside. Greg didn't follow me out, and I crouched down on the road in front of the inn. I can't take this anymore. As I muttered those words, tears began to pour from my eyes. It seemed my heart had finally reached its limit. I reached into my pocket for my phone and called my father. I knew he would be awake because he had a habit of going for a walk early in the morning, so even in my confusion, I instinctively called him.
Melissa, what's wrong?
As I expected, my father answered immediately, and I explained everything through my tears. I want a divorce. I want to come home. My father listened quietly, then spoke in a gentle voice.
I understand. I'll come get you right away. Just wait a little. I won't forgive anyone who made my precious daughter suffer like this.
His voice was kind, but he couldn't hide the anger he felt toward my in-laws. After that, I prepared divorce papers. After filling them out, I confronted Kyle and his family with the signed documents.
Oh, really?
I thought Kyle would yell at me, but instead, he quickly signed the papers and handed them back to me. Surprised, I took them, and Kyle, with a twisted expression, said,
I was planning to divorce you soon anyway, since you can't have kids and can't even do the inn's work properly. You saved me the trouble. Right, everyone?
Kyle turned to his family as he said this.
That's right. We don't have the luxury to support someone so useless.
Yeah, totally. She's been completely useless. At least before, she had some money, so there was some value in keeping her around, but lately she's been broke. Seriously, such a waste.
Exactly. If only you had given me the PIN for that bank card I'm holding onto.
Helen and Nina smiled at me with identical nasty grins. Greg, who seemed to have had his pride wounded when I rejected him earlier, nodded in agreement with Kyle and added,
Kyle's right. Useless trash like you should just disappear.
Kyle let out a snort of laughter at Greg's words.
Well said, Dad. This feels so good. Finally, the parasite is leaving.
The moment I saw Kyle's twisted face, nausea welled up inside me. Why did I ever fall in love with someone so despicable? Was my judgment that poor? In the past, I would have remained emotionless even when faced with insults. But now, I could feel my emotions coming back. Seeing the twisted faces of my in-laws, a wave of anger surged within me. A few hours after I called my father, he contacted me to say he had arrived at the inn, and I sighed in relief. My mom is getting everything ready for me back home, so it's just my dad and my brother who are coming to pick me up. I gather the few belongings I have left and head for the front door. Over the past 2 years, most of my possessions were either stolen by Nina or thrown away by Helen, so I don't have much to pack. Well, I'm leaving now.
Wait a minute. I'm not satisfied until I give your family a piece of my mind. We're coming with you.
My in-laws grinned as they followed me out. But the moment we stepped outside, their smug smiles froze.
What the hell is this luxury car doing here?
Kyle's words surprised me too. Parked in front of the inn was a high-end car, one that even I, who knows nothing about cars, could recognize. My family doesn't own anything like this. I looked around, wondering if it belonged to someone else, when my father stepped out of the driver's seat.
I'm here to pick you up, Melissa.
Dad, what's with this car? Before my father could answer, the back door opened, and a large figure emerged. When the person saw Kyle standing behind me, he narrowed his eyes and spoke.
It's been a while, Kyle.
You said Kyle. Are you Melissa's brother?
Kyle, looking a bit pale, pointed at my brother. Yes, this imposing man was my brother, Luke.
When I saw you at the wedding, you had a normal body, right?
Kyle's shock was understandable. Just before I got married, Luke casually attended a professional wrestling match and got hooked. He was in college at the time, but he ended up begging our parents on his knees to let him pursue a career as a professional wrestler, working part-time jobs while training to go pro. For the 2 years Kyle hadn't seen him, Luke had been relentlessly building his body. The result was a muscular powerhouse that left Kyle and my in-laws visibly shaken. I had seen updates on Luke's transformation through his social media, so I wasn't too surprised. But seeing him in person, the sheer force of his presence was intimidating. Even I, knowing about his transformation, was taken aback. So my in-laws must have been even more shocked.
I've heard everything from Dad. It seems my sister has been well cared for by you all.
Luke said, glaring sharply at my in-laws. It wasn't just his body that had changed over the past 2 years. His demeanor had shifted too. Luke used to have a gentle face, but the look he gave my in-laws was as sharp as a blade, piercing through them. His face radiated barely contained anger. Kyle, standing before Luke, looked ready to bolt at any moment. Now a man with such an impressive build, Luke was once a little boy who constantly clung to me. He was weak as a child and often got sick, missing school frequently.
I wish I could go outside and play,
He'd say, half crying in bed, and I would sit beside him, reading picture books or watching TV together to keep him company.
Melissa, read this one next.
Even with a fever, Luke would smile and hand me a picture book. While gently patting his head, I would read to him until he fell asleep. I doted on Luke, who is 5 years younger than me, and it seems that's made him a bit overly attached to his sister. I remember when I was in high school, and I was crying my eyes out after my boyfriend dumped me. Luke got so angry that he almost stormed over to his house. By that time, he was no longer weak and had grown taller than me, so it was tough to hold him back. Even after I got married, he was still overly attached to me, and now he stood in front of my in-laws, exuding an intimidating presence.
Luke, you've really grown. You came to pick up your sister, right? Melissa, go ahead and get in the car.
Kyle, drenched in cold sweat, spoke to me in a gentle tone. It had been years since I heard him talk to me like that, and I couldn't help but feel both surprised and disgusted at how quickly he changed his attitude in front of someone he couldn't beat. Luke seemed to feel the same as he stepped forward, closing the gap with Kyle.
But first, you need to make amends for what you did to my sister.
Make amends? What are you talking about?
Kyle was sweating profusely, to the point where it looked like he might pass out from dehydration. He couldn't meet Luke's intimidating gaze and kept darting his eyes around.
Just so you know, if you try to lay a hand on me, I'll call the cops immediately.
Why would I hit you? If I did, your bones would break. I'm not so twisted that I'd hit someone as weak as you.
Kyle's face briefly showed anger at being called weak. His unnecessary pride had been wounded, but faced with a muscular, grown man, he couldn't say anything back and just bit his lip. Seeing Kyle like this, Luke looked exasperated and turned to my father, who was still in the car.
Dad, bring out Chris.
All right, will do.
My father got out of the driver's seat and opened the passenger door. When the person inside stepped out, my in-laws gasped in shock.
Chris, the branch manager, what are you doing here?
They weren't the only ones surprised. Chris, what's going on?
Hey, Melissa, it's been a while. Oh, and by the way, this car is mine. I splurged a little.
Waving at me with a smile was my uncle, Chris, on my father's side. But Chris was supposed to be working at a bank branch overseas. He was too busy to attend my wedding, so he only sent a gift and couldn't come back to the US. Since then, we'd only exchanged messages. As I stood there, Confused about why he was here, my father, who had gotten out of the car with Chris, explained the situation.
Actually, Chris returned to the U.S. a few days ago. His overseas assignment ended, and he's been reassigned to a bank here in the U.S. And as it happens, his new assignment is at a bank in the same region where Melissa lives. He was just about to contact you when I told him about the divorce, so he decided to come along.
Chris nodded as my father explained, then turned his smiling gaze toward my in-laws.
I was introduced as the new branch manager, so I made a brief appearance at the bank here. During that time, I made sure to greet the clients who had taken out loans. I didn't realize one of those clients was my niece's in-laws. I couldn't attend the wedding, and Melissa didn't tell me much about her in-laws. Plus, my schedule was so tight that our introductions were pretty rushed.
So that's what happened. Wait, hold on, loans? This inn has a bank loan? I didn't know that. I looked at Kyle, and he avoided my gaze, looking uncomfortable.
Well, things have been a little tough lately.
I see. He went to the bank for a loan without telling me anything. Now that I think about it, it's true that the number of guests had been declining recently. But even so, my in-laws didn't change their lifestyle at all, and they didn't seem to be taking any measures to address the situation. I couldn't help but be amazed at how they just idled away while the business was struggling.
No way. I can't believe the branch manager is her relative.
Greg muttered, his face pale. Next to him, Helen and Nina were also turning white, as they remembered all the harassment they had subjected me to. Perhaps they were regretting their actions now. They suddenly put on the kind of friendly smiles they usually reserved for customers and started speaking to me.
We had no idea your uncle was such an important person. Melissa, you should have told us sooner.
Really? We're practically family, so why didn't you say anything?
Helen reached out to me with a friendly gesture, as if trying to appear close to me in front of Chris. But I dodged her hand. Please don't touch me. Are you planning to pinch me again? Helen had a habit of pinching my arm when she was particularly irritated. It didn't leave any marks, but it hurt more than you'd think. Helen's face twisted in shock as she realized I was exposing her behavior.
Pinch you? I never did anything like that to you.
Oh, have you forgotten what you did? Did you also forget how you forced me to go to the OBGYN and then accused me of being infertile? At these words, Luke's eyes widened as he glared at my in-laws. My father's face became expressionless as he stared coldly at them. Chris, who had been smiling until now, also turned his gaze toward my in-laws, though his eyes were anything but friendly. With a quiet anger simmering behind his eyes, Chris slowly addressed them.
Is what Melissa just said true?
Well, you see, I was only worried about Melissa's health, so I took her to the doctor. I didn't mean any harm.
Be quiet.
Chris's smile finally disappeared. In a voice that seemed to crawl on the ground, he directed his words at Helen, then turned his now terrifying gaze to Greg.
How dare you treat my beloved niece so horribly? Consider your loan cut off. Go find another bank. Though with your financial situation, I doubt anyone will lend to you.
Please wait. There seems to be some misunderstanding.
Greg, in desperation, tried to approach me.
Melissa, tell your uncle this is all just a misunderstanding.
Don't come any closer. Are you planning to touch me again? It was my father who exploded with anger at these words.
What have you done to my precious daughter?
My father's face turned red with fury, and his booming voice echoed all around. The fierce look on his face made Greg yelp in fear.
Dad, stop. If we lay a hand on them, it'll only cause us trouble. I get it, though. If I could, I'd love to beat them until their faces are unrecognizable.
Look's harsh words made my in-laws tremble uncontrollably. If we stay here any longer, someone's going to get hurt. I decided it was time to bring this to a close, so I stepped in front of my in-laws. Taking out my phone, I opened the recording app and played back the various insults they had hurled at me. With this recording, I'm going to sue you.
What?
Why are you so surprised? Did you really think I would just walk away quietly after the divorce? For the past 2 years, I had quietly endured their abuse. But I always held on to a small hope that I might one day leave this place. With that in mind, I had installed a recording app on my phone and secretly recorded their insults toward me.
Well done, Melissa. I'll help you find a top-notch lawyer.
Really? That's so reassuring. Just then, I noticed that things were getting a bit noisy outside the inn. Looking around, I saw that the neighbors had gathered. They must have heard my father's earlier outburst.
What's going on?
Isn't that the wife from this inn?
Seeing this as an opportunity, I raised my voice so that the neighbors could hear and addressed my in-laws. So, you tormented me for 2 whole years. You forced me to go to the OB/GYN, stole my belongings, and even touched me without my consent. I'm not your convenient little servant. I'm not some robot that doesn't feel anything when you call me useless or incompetent. I thought my tone was a bit melodramatic, but this way, the neighbors would understand just how awful my in-laws had been.
What? The people from this inn bullied their daughter-in-law.
That's just terrible.
For good measure, I played the recording of their insults again. This time loud enough for the neighbors to hear.
What is this? It's horrible.
They totally deserve to be sued, don't they?
Realizing that the neighbors were now aware of what they had done, my in-laws started to panic, looking pitifully flustered. From now on, their reputation in this neighborhood would be ruined. But they brought this on themselves. Well then, thank you for the past 2 years. I flashed them a big smile as I said my final goodbye. All they could do was watch in despair as I climbed into Chris's luxury car. After leaving my in-laws' house, I hired the lawyer Chris introduced me to and sued them for damages. By the way, I filed the divorce papers on my way back to my parents' house. I left the compensation claim to the lawyer, but when I later heard about the process, I was so exasperated I could only hold my head in disbelief. When the lawyer met with my in-laws to demand the compensation, they were apparently full of self-serving excuses.
We don't have that kind of money. We absolutely won't pay.
Exactly. We lost our loan because of that ex-wife.
My in-laws yelled and screamed at the lawyer, but
well then, shall we go to court?
at that single remark, they immediately fell silent and eventually agreed to pay the compensation. They ended up selling some of their personal assets to come up with the money, but their troubles didn't end there. Because I had exposed their wrongdoings to the neighbors, they were now shunned by everyone in the community. Apparently, rumors had even reached the mothers at the kindergarten where Nina's child went, and they all cut ties with her. Helen was also being avoided by the neighborhood ladies, who now whispered behind her back. Greg was struggling to keep the inn afloat after the loan was cut off, desperately searching for another lender. but he hadn't found one yet. This was likely because Chris, now the branch manager, had warned the neighboring banks about the inn's dire financial situation. In the midst of all this, Kyle reached out through the lawyer, begging to see me. I agreed to meet him one last time, as there were things I wanted to say as well. With Luke there as a precaution, I met Kyle at the lawyer's office. He looked noticeably worn out in the short time since we last saw each other.
Please, come back. The inn is in serious trouble right now. If you return, the neighbors will stop giving us strange looks. We need you.
Kyle pleaded with me desperately. I responded in a cold voice. You've never apologized to me, not once. Kyle looked startled by my comment. The fact that he hadn't apologized until now was because he didn't realize he had done anything wrong. With a deep sigh, I said my final words to him. Marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life. These past 2 years were a complete waste. If I could, I'd erase every memory of you. Just thinking about you disgusts me. These were the words I had wanted to say to Kyle. Finally saying them, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Kyle began to cry, his tears falling freely. Don't act like a victim. You don't have that right. Goodbye. I sincerely hope we never meet again. With that, Luke and I left the lawyer's office, leaving Kyle sobbing on the floor. With everything finally over, I'm now living a peaceful life back at my parents' home. I've even found a new job at a company near my family's home, and once I've settled in, I'm planning to move out and live on my own. The new job pays well enough for me to live comfortably on my own. And the best part is that the people around me don't take me for granted. I don't know if I'll ever remarry, but for now, I want to cherish my time alone. Besides, after making the huge mistake of marrying Kyle, I've lost confidence in my judgment. Maybe I should ask Chris to introduce me to someone nice. Chris, who has always been fond of me, would surely find someone good. But for now, I plan to take some time to heal the emotional scars from the past 2 years and enjoy my own company. Soon, Luke will be making his professional debut in a wrestling tour in a different region. Though he's achieved his dream of becoming a pro, he says his new goal is to reach the top of the wrestling world. Seeing Luke chase his dreams made him seem incredibly bright and full of promise. To think that the once frail Luke would actually debut as a professional wrestler. It would have thrilled me from before I got married. I plan to go to his debut match with my parents and Chris to cheer him on. As I imagine the fun days ahead, a smile spread across my face.